record our session and place it up on our YouTube channel. So if there's anything that you wanted to catch again, or anybody that may have missed it. Few guidelines for our session today. We do have all of you muted. So if you can stay that way, unless you have a question, we will answer lots of questions today. So you are welcome to put them in the chat or unmute yourself and we can ask those questions live. Pamela is co-hosting this with me today and she's gonna help me manage some of those questions. So we have a format that we're following. So we may not necessarily be following the answering questions as they're listed in the chat. So if you feel like we have forgotten you, feel free to private message Pamela in the chat and she can kind of let you know where you're at and that we haven't forgotten. We'll do our best to answer all of your questions the best that we can. If your questions refer to a specific issue, your child, maybe a registration issue or something like that, email us because we can coordinate those more easily one-on-one. And when we get to the end, we're going to give a chance to say, is there anything else? So if throughout this process we do miss out on you, we will do that. As you mentioned, the video is being recorded. So we are being recorded. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel. And unlike our past sessions, we did get our Zoom upgraded. So we now have a record number right now, 119 folks that are joining us. And we had a very generous donor who allowed that to happen. So I wanted to thank the generosity there. There's three big topics for us today, and they have to do with school reopening, our virtual learning plans, and our back to school plans. So there's a lot going on, a whole lot more than usually happens the first week of August. So we're gonna go through and talk about those things. And then if we don't address your concerns, let us know, and we will fill you in on those. And so we start out with school reopening, and I wish I had more positive news on reopening school to in-person learning. Unfortunately, we do remain on the governor's watch list. That is a county decision. And so there's still too many positive cases for us to be removed from that watch list. So we're still in the mode that we are opening school virtually by order of the governor and the local health department. I know many people are asking for a date certain. When are you coming back to school? I really wish I knew. Some school districts are setting dates. For instance, Poway a week ago said that they were coming back the first week of September, and then a couple days ago they said they're coming back the first week of December. The reality is they really don't know, and they are kind of speculating on where we're going to be at. What I can tell you is I wouldn't be surprised if Poway does not come back December 2nd, at least not in full. Our goal is to come back to school as soon as it's safe to do it and as soon as we're allowed to do it. And so we're in a situation now that if we are given and I'll go into the waiver situation and I'll go into the getting off the watch list, but if we are permitted to come back, we are going to come back when it's safe for our students and staff to do so, but come back in a way that makes sense. We won't have you in virtual learning today and change your whole schedule tomorrow. Part of our task force advice was to kind of look for logical breaks in times. And when you look at getting off this watch list, we probably have about a 2 to 4 week notice before those things happen. So we'll have some time to make some logical decisions. School years are generally structured in 6-week increments. So we would fall probably within a few weeks of those. We do plan on seeking a waiver. It's been a big topic in the news as of late. As I told you last time, when the governor came out with the decree that all schools in San Diego at least would be shut down, there was a little footnote in there that said that you could apply for a waiver. And it said that elementary school districts could apply for a waiver. This week, some information came out on the waiver process. And the information that came out essentially said that classes TK through 6 would be the only ones that would be eligible. So it's not elementary school. So 7th and 8th grade would not be eligible for the waiver. They also put some stipulations on what it would take to get one, rather onerous stipulations actually. And they put a hold on the waiver process as a whole, meaning they're not allowing it to happen until further notice. Two things are going on. One, the waiver gets applied through the local health department, and our local health department saying they're not ready to accept them. And the state is saying they're putting the process on hold because they don't trust the data on positivity rates that are coming to them. So they're saying if we don't know how many positive cases we can't use those positive cases to determine whether we're going to give you a waiver. So it's very governmental bureaucracy, but it's putting us in a holding pattern for now. When we get the opportunity, we are going to seek a waiver. It will depend on what our health conditions are, and it'll depend on input, because part of this waiver process is asking you, parents and staff, your opinions on that. And if we get to the point where we're going to request one, we'll find out your opinions on it. But our feeling is if we can get kids back in some capacity in a safe way, whether that's our special needs students, whether that's our English learners, whether that's kids at a certain age, we'll evaluate what we're permitted to do and what's safe to do. So we'll keep you posted as that moves forward, but right now it's kind of stuck at a moot point, unfortunately. We did get some good news since we last spoke about our San Pasquale Union preschool. Our preschool will be opening as scheduled, unless we get information to the contrary, on August 19th, which is our scheduled first day of school. And the preschool can open because it's opening under the child care guidelines. So for those of you who've been paying real close attention to this process, we did get our safe return to school plan approved by the school board. And that will be the guidance for us as we operate the preschool. And the key to it is we're looking at addressing the big four, and that's screening students as they arrive. It is distancing them the best that we can. It is having masks for adults and individuals 3 years and old, third grade and older, and intensive cleaning efforts. So when it comes to our preschoolers, we are asking our preschoolers to be wearing masks in transit, meaning when they come to the school, all adults that are at the school and that are bringing kids to the school are wearing masks. We are encouraging them to wear masks while they're in school, but it is not a requirement. The way the mask requirements have rolled out is there is a instruction that if kids are 2 years or less than 2 years old, they should not be wearing masks. 3 to 3rd grade is recommended, and those that are 3rd grade and older are required at school. So we'll be operating under that premise. And the good news is the preschool childcare guidelines are operated through cohorts. And so one of the successful ways of getting kids both into childcare and into school is to maintain consistent cohorts. So what you'll see in our preschool is instead of 20-something kids in a room, you'll see 2 different rooms. Kids don't intermix, 12 kids max. And like I said, we will try to facilitate physical distancing between our preschoolers, but if you've ever kept 3 and 4 years olds apart, you'll know that that creates a little bit of challenge. The other issue I wanted to update you on is childcare. We are seeking to for a waiver to permit us to conduct pop-up child care services here at San Pasquale. There was some authorization for childcare provided by school staff in June that expired, and we are looking for childcare options to provide probably 2 cohorts, no more than 12 each, similar to the preschool, of school-age kids, and the service would be offered to employees and essential workers who are connected to our school. So I'll keep you posted on that. It is currently a moot point as well because we have not received the waiver, but I'm optimistic that we'll get something that moves forward in that. So when we kind of look at a question that came up last time that I wanted to address now, because I realized I caused some concern and consternation with our families. One of the things that we're looking for when we come back to school is to maintain physical distancing the best we can, meaning we try to keep kids separated 6 feet or more. We look at trying to do that in classrooms, and when we can't do that, we look to mitigate it through things like masking or barriers or so forth. I did mention in our last Coffee with the Principal that we were putting a hold on our interdistrict transfers, and that created some confusion because I don't think I was clear enough. So what I want you to understand is that if you're coming to our school on interdistrict transfer, which is about 1/3 of our school population, we are not removing any kids from school. So if you're here on an interdistrict transfer, you are here to stay unless you choose to go. If you've been accepted for an interdistrict transfer for the coming year, you are still accepted to come to our school. We haven't changed your minds and we haven't rescinded any of those offers. Where the interdistrict transfers are placed on hold is any requests that have come to us that have not been accepted to this point. And so we are putting them on hold because we want to be able to bring our kids back for in-person learning. And we're concerned that if we start bringing more students onto the school environment, it will limit our ability to bring kids back for in-person learning. Once our school opens up and the physical distancing requirements open up, we'll open up our interdistricts as we have before. So that's all the back to school stuff. Most of you, when I've been hearing from you, have said, hey, I really need information on what your distance learning program is going to be. Because you told us we're moving into distance learning, and what is that going to look like? And so as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, Governor put us into distance learning. We'll be there for the foreseeable future. I know a lot of people are anxious about it. And the good news is that we've got some information to share with you today. When we kind of moved through this and the governor had shut us down for our distance learning program, about 2 weeks ago, he released, and we shared a little bit of this with you 2 weeks ago, he released some of the conditions of distance learning, what schools needed to do to actually get funded for their distance learning. And they had stuff that was in there that had minimum instructional minutes, engagement with students every day, that kind of stuff. And so we had started to form our distance learning plan around those and looking to not only meet but exceed what these requirements were from the state. Just this past Monday, the state released the template by which schools are required to fill out and explain what their program is. So we have it's called the Learning Continuity and Attendance Plan. And yes, it's probably as boring as it sounds. That goes to the board on Tuesday night. And so that kind of articulates a little bit about what we're doing as far as our instructional program, how we're engaging community members, where we're spending our money. Goes into things like, what does your distance learning program look like? What are the options? Goes into how are we supporting kids nutritionally? How are we supporting mental health? So it goes into a broad range of things. But what I've heard from most of you is you were looking to get information on what are our programmatic options and what is like the schedule or the day gonna look like. So I'll spend a little bit of time going into that with you today. Our primary option, and there's a lot of terms that are thrown around as far as distance learning goes. You hear distance learning and virtual learning and home learning and blended learning. And so when we start referring to our core instructional program, we're referring to it as virtual learning. Because what we heard from people when we went through the spring, which was more of our emergency teaching, we heard a lot of folks saying, hey, I want this to be more like real school. I want them to use their regular books. I want them to be taught by their regular teacher. I want them to engage in standard activities, and I want them to keep up. So if my child's in first grade, I want them to do all the things that a first grader should do. And so that is the program that we've established as our virtual program. And that really is, your child's teacher is gonna be is gonna be the primary educator, and we're gonna lean on parents and computers and that kind of stuff to help that happen. But you as the parent in the virtual learning program are not expected to be the primary teacher. Distance learning will be another option that we have. And distance learning is gonna be mostly computer learning. And this is people who are looking for something that's purely asynchronous, meaning that there's not a teacher that's directing it. While some folks will choose that, I would say that the virtual learning option is going to be a much more rich, robust experience for your kids. And some folks are looking for what we're calling a home learning option. And home learning is essentially the parent's the teacher and gets curriculum from the school, and the parent assumes essentially the responsibilities of the teacher, and you get some support from the school and some technological support. But we'll spend most of our time talking about the program that most of the kids will be in, which is that virtual learning program. The fourth one that I mentioned was blended learning. And that's a program by which part of their schooling happens here at school and part of their schooling happens at home. We're not going to go into that in any detail right now because we're not allowed to bring the kids here at school. So let's talk a little bit about the virtual learning program. First and foremost, I wanted to say that our teachers have done an amazing job this summer, rallying around student needs and in a very short time, preparing a very robust virtual learning program. As I mentioned, just a few weeks ago, kids were coming back to school, and we were planning on the safety mitigations we'd need to keep everybody safe. One of the perks of the job for being a teacher is they get summers off. Not this summer for our teachers. They've done a lot of good work. And what I've been impressed is that they realize that virtual learning, for the most part, isn't anybody's choice. There's no perfect schedule. We talked about the Goldilocks analogy of too much, too little, too hard, too easy. But what we focused on was, how do we create a schedule? How do we create a curriculum that we keep our kids engaged in learning? How much time is too much on a Zoom, and how much is too less? And how much structure do we put in, and how much emphasis on a certain subject? How do we support you guys as being parent partners? And so as we kind of went through this process, we're getting to the point where we're looking at this as a theme of, we're no longer in emergency teaching. We are in the new normal, at least for the foreseeable future. And so as we move into this, we anticipate that you'll have greater access, and your child will have greater access to your child's teacher. Most of our teachers, if not all of them, will be teaching from their classrooms. They will have the technology, they will have the resources, they will have some stability in a schedule. They'll have access to their professional development and computer support. So you'll see a more consistent delivery. The other thing that's of benefit for our teachers is that when you set up your classroom in your bedroom or your kitchen, it's really easy to be on 24/7. And so we're looking at teachers and students returning to a little bit more of a routine, structured schedule. Speaking of schedule, we have created schedules that are consistent in their breaks and their philosophy from our TK through 5 and our 6 through 8. So if you have multiple age kids, you can expect that your elementary students will have their morning meetings. Their school day will start about the same time. They'll have the same recess times. They'll have the same lunch times. Same if you have kids in middle school. All of our schedules are set up to have morning meetings to start the day at 8:30 when school normally starts. So we're expecting school to start at 8:30. And we're going to use a little bit of time to start those days to do some community building, some social emotional supports, building connectivity, building some class culture, setting some norms for how we're going to be interacting. So kind of expect to see the school day starting up at 8:30 in all of our classes. As I mentioned, the kids will have a recess break for your TK kids through 5th grade. You're going to see that around 10 o'clock. Middle schoolers, and I'll get into their schedule with more specificity, they have a couple breaks in the morning and a little bit later lunch. Lunch for the younger kids is around 12 o'clock, 12:40 for middle school. And then after that, the instructional day in the afternoon is a little bit looser in the sense that we're pulling opportunities for kids to get one-on-one, small group, project-based, those kind of things. So I'll go in that in just a little moment. The other thing that we heard from you guys is it was hard, especially if you had multiple kids, to know how to access the system and understand what was supposed to be going on. And so what we have is we have a consistent learning management system depending on what grade level your kid's in. So if you have a child that's TK, K, and 1, Seesaw is going to be your learning hub, and Seesaw will be the way that you get your portal by which you access the assignments and the activities for kids. For all of our students 2nd grade through 8th grade, we'll be using a Google Classroom, and Google Classroom will link into their resources, their assignments, places to turn things in. So there'll be some consistency for you as far as how you both access and monitor the system. There's a switch to a much more academically centered focus. We realized that when school shut down on a dime and kids were forced into distance learning, not only was there a transition instructionally for our teachers to keep up and our students, but there was some disconnect from the learning environment for some kids altogether. And we want to make sure that when we bring kids back now, that we're taking a look at making sure we're addressing their language arts needs, their writing needs, their math needs. And you'll see our schedules very heavily into these core subjects because we need to make sure that we're preparing them for now, making up for what happened before and getting them ready for their next steps. The curriculum that we're going to be using is the same curriculum that kids would be using here at school. We've got some really cool tools we've invested in, engagement tools to access that curriculum and engage with that curriculum in different ways. But the curriculum they're going to be using is standards aligned, board approved curriculum that they use in school. with the belief that we are going to move through at relatively the same pace that we would for kids that are here at school and ready for them when they return. So there should be a lot more fluidity moving back into school, and if there does happen to be some movement in and out depending on health conditions. There'll be daily instructional blocks for all students in their language arts and their math and their writing, with their teachers actually teaching their courses. Middle school also has 2 times a week where they'll have their science blocks and humanities blocks. As I mentioned earlier, we heard concerns that parents don't want their kids on Zoom all day, and we don't either. For those of you who have worked through Zoom for the last 5 months, you realize the fatigue that comes with that. We are going to be using Zoom. Some teachers will probably use Google Meets to provide some direct instruction to kids, to provide some small group instruction, but it's not going to be a continuous lecture throughout the day. It isn't how we would teach while they're here, and it's not how we're going to teach through the computer. TK through 5, one of the big changes that you'll see TK through 5 is the teachers were saying, these large classes, really, we dealt with management more than we dealt with instruction. So what you'll see is you'll see smaller groups in the polled. So 2 kids in the same class may be in different groups throughout the day so that they are getting what they need when they need, and the teacher can address their specific needs. So you'll see small group instruction with independent or computer led activities. And the teachers have been really looking at avoiding repeated logins throughout the day. So they've got some unique strategies, because our concern is every time a kid needs to connect in to a Zoom or a class meeting is one more time they don't get connected to that. And so we're looking to reduce those logins. As I mentioned, we had a lot of questions about middle school and what's middle school going to look like. And so I want to go into that for just a little bit. Our middle school is, each day is a homeroom, plus a 5-period day, at least Monday through Thursday. The homeroom is, like I said, dealing with some social issues and some class cohesion. It starts at 8:30 every morning. The first 3 periods will be consistent every day of the week, so Monday through Friday. And they will consist of their English language arts, their math, and then every other day will be either their humanities, which is their history course, or their science course. So that will be a flip-flop on those every other days. Fridays, it'll be either humanities or science as well, depending on odd even weeks. Middle schoolers have 2 transitional breaks. So they start at 8:30. They have a homeroom. Their homeroom is their first period class. Their classes last 60 minutes. They have 15-minute breaks between those 60-minute classes. They end up with lunch at 12:40. Students are expected in middle school to attend their homeroom in those first 3 period classes. So we are expecting attendance and participation during those classes. The kids won't necessarily be on Zoom the whole time, but they will get teacher-led instruction. And then depending on what the activity is or what the levels of support are needed. There's a 45-minute lunch schedule, just like we have here at school. And then those last 2 periods of the day, periods 4 and 5, I believe they last about 50 minutes long, and they're a little bit more flexible. So every other day, a kid will either receive writing support from their teacher. We have writing blocks that are scheduled, or the teacher will, that will be the PE equivalent. So we're gonna have some live PE instruction and some physical activity. What parents have told us is that the kids need to be engaged in things that promote their physical health and wellness. And so we do have things that are plugged in, but kids will get some choices to what they do with that. Every other day, kids will have access in the afternoon, actually every day, kids will have access in the afternoon to math tutorial. So one of the things that we heard from parents is, hey, my child's trying to learn the math from the computer and I don't understand and I can't help. So there's times that are set aside that kids who need that extra help can get that help, either individual or small group. There's flexible time for them to do their work product in the afternoon. And also all teachers, elementary and middle, will have a chunk in that afternoon that's dedicated towards their office hours. So that means if you have a question, if your child has a question, if there's some additional instruction that's needed to be done, we have some flexibility in that time in the afternoon. The other middle school issue that has come up is the issue of Acellus. We had some people that loved it because it allowed their child to advance. And we had some people that didn't, because essentially they said, this is kind of boring and kind of dated. And while the content is okay, the delivery method really wasn't engaging folks. For those reasons, we're going to be using Accelos on a very limited basis for this year. We expect to be using it for the history component as we're focusing our direct instruction on our language arts, math, science, writing. So we expect to be using Accelos for history. We expect to be using it for those folks that do want to advance. We had some folks that advanced in their math and were able to take higher level math courses when they got to high school. We had some folks that really needed some extra help and were able to go back and get some directed help and some accountability there. So we'll have options for it, but don't expect it to be the primary curriculum for your middle school. We did get a question that asked us about middle school electives. And so that middle school electives question is essentially, are you gonna have them this year and how do kids sign up? And initially on our rollout, we are not gonna have middle school electives scheduled. And the reason being is we want to focus on some more of those core skills. Some teachers have talked about offering their middle school electives through clubs. And so I think once they get their feet on the ground under them, starting this school year, you'll see some of those offerings. ASB will continue. So if your child has been elected to ASB as an officer or chair, ASB will be relied upon to do some school spirit stuff and try to keep kids together. And we will continue our relationship with San Diego Zoo Global Safari Park. We have TK through 8th grade students receiving instruction and activities through the park, and they will continue that virtually with us this year. Getting back to the academic program as a whole, not just middle school, we did hear some concerns from parents about synchronous and asynchronous options, meaning during this kind of crazy time, parents can't always be there to support their kids and their learning, or kids can't always be in front of a computer at a set time. So what you'll see in the scheduling options is we have expectations that kids are engaged at certain times when instruction is going to be delivered, but we're working with teachers to see how can that student get that same information if they needed to at a different time. So we're looking at that, and you'll see synchronous and asynchronous options kind of peppered in through all our academic program from TK through 8. The other change that we looked at was parents were saying, hey, I'm getting the information Monday morning, but I've already started to work and I can't really kind of help my kid kind of get organized or together. And so we're looking at switching our minimum days. Kind of means a little bit less when kids aren't at school, but we're looking at switching our minimum days from Thursday to Friday. And the reason being is, and the expectation is that instruction and access to their teachers will stop at their lunch break on Friday, so 12:40, depending on the age of the kids. And then the teachers will use that time in the afternoon to prepare the learning units for the following week. And so to have the ability to take a look at some things on the weekend so that parents can help kind of organize and get connected. Not all of the resources will be released. Some parents complain, hey, if you give my child everything, they'll work 24 hours straight and not have anything to do for the whole week. So there will be some expectations during the week, but we do plan on having things front loaded for parents and have a little bit of backload time for things to get done so that we do understand that this is a crazy time for everybody. As I mentioned earlier, we've got some really cool new engagement tools. You'll see kids using, teachers using Nearpod, Screencastify, Seesaw, and Kami. So there's 4 subscription services that we purchased this year that teachers were using individually with great results that all teachers will have access to. But we did hear from you guys that you want real books too, that you don't want everything on the computer. And so what we've done for that is we've got 2 things. Mrs. Carroll worked really hard to get the library system upgraded so that books can be reserved electronically. So if you go to the library page on the school website and take a look for that, you can get into the system and place a book on hold. We have our last curbside library that's scheduled for this Wednesday coming up from 9 to 11. But once the school year starts, we will have a weekly distribution on Fridays in which anything that the teacher needs to get in the kids' hands, whether it's a textbook, a whiteboard, a packet work, whatever needs to get in the kids' hands, we'll have a pickup thing scheduled for Fridays so that we can still maintain physical distancing, but get physical things in your kids' hands that they need. So that library system will also be used in those distribution centers for you to reserve a book and have your kids get books and return them. Our amazing maintenance crew is building a library book return in the front of the school. So we will give you some options to return books at times that aren't in the big long drive-throughs. So we've got some options for you on that. Some other things that I wanted to talk to you guys about is we mentioned earlier that there was some concerns about physical activity and making sure that people were getting physically active. And so we are taking Mr. G, who was our middle school PE teacher, and he's going to be overseeing the PE programs for students that are TK through 8th grade. We still are refining these plans. As I mentioned, we had our teachers that worked really hard over the summer, but we are bringing them back early. I talked to you last time, we were trying to secure some funding to pay for teachers to come back early. So our teachers the majority of them are coming back next week to take a look at these plans and refine them. I imagine the schedules will stay pretty consistent to what we talked about because we've spent a lot of time with them. But during this time, the teachers are going to get proficient on those new tools. They're going to make recordings so that you guys can get proficient on those tools. One of the things that we heard from you is, hey, I really can't help very much if I don't understand how this thing works. And so we're going to make sure that parents and teachers are educated and proficient in these tools that kids are expected to be using. And so we'll have some of those things that'll come through. The last section I wanted to talk to you about today is back to school. You know, this is normally the time of year where people are really excited to come back to school, and we are still planning some of our back to school events, even though people aren't physically allowed to come back to school. There's a supply list that just went out. It's on the website. It's in Peach Jar. And I understand that while some of you really enjoy buying tissue paper and all that kind of stuff, the supply list is much more limited. So I think you will like the fact that the supplies are really the core supplies that kids will need for their home distance learning. So take a look at that. It'd be great for kids to have that on day one. Supply lists are suggested lists so that kids can be successful. If you are having a challenge financially with that, let us know. But it is much pared down from years past. We are still having a Saints Day as well. For those of you who have been around San Pasquale for a while, you know that Saints Day is a very exciting day in which all the kids come back together and they find out who their teachers are, and we try to get you signed up for our parent groups and convince you how wonderful we are. Unfortunately, we can't bring that big gathering together, but we can sort of build up that anticipation. And so we are looking at the same as we would on Saints Day. We will be sending out to you your child's class placement, so your teacher or schedule. So expect a message right around 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the 17th, and that will be your introduction to your child's teacher. We are distributing computers and iPads on Saints Day as well. So Mrs. Lee will be sending out a message for those who want to sign up for devices. We do have enough devices for those who need it. So some of you checked out devices for last year. If you still have it, continue to keep it because you'll need it again for this year. The only exception would be is if your child was a first grader last year, they're going to be using a different type of device. So if you had a first grader and you still have an iPad, bring it back and we can exchange that for a Chromebook if you need it. But that will be from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock on Monday the 17th for Saints Day. And then our first day of school, we have the mother of all drive-throughs scheduled for you to meet your teacher. What I've heard from you guys and what I've heard from your child's teachers is they're really concerned about the ability to connect with your kids when they've never met or they've never seen each other face to face. The current health orders prohibit us from bringing kids in, even one at a time. They prohibit us from doing that. But they don't prohibit us from doing a physically distanced drive-through. And so wait for some information. We're working out all the details on how we pull this off. But our first day of school is August 19th. We expect between 8:30 and 12 to have different grade levels and different parts of the alphabet kind of staged out. And the purpose of that is for you to actually come meet your child's teacher. Parents and kids will need to stay in the car. Like I said, we'll stay physically distanced. I know our teachers have things similar to those things that they wanted you to take home for take-home learning that they will have for you. and give to your kids. But we're really excited about the option, especially for some of our really younger students who've never been to school, to actually know that their teacher's a real person and get a chance to meet them. So those were some important things that we were looking to do and get you guys connected to. I think we have a few questions here in the chat, so I will get to some of those things. Will daily Zooms be recorded for working parents and kids that will be in daycare and camp? Yeah, it depends on what activity is happening then. We have some plans for teachers to record portions of their lessons to make sure that they're accessible asynchronously. So like if your kid's in camp and can engage in that program. So we have some plans in place for that. The things that we cannot record is if the teacher is leading a class discussion with other students. So we're not allowed to record other kids in the Zoom, but the teachers do have plans for recording key parts of their lesson. So once you get connected to your teacher, make sure if you have those issues of schedule to explain that so that we can make adjustments so that your child's getting the delivery of the lesson, and probably some flexibility on when those things are done. But that was a really big talk that we had when we were putting these schedules together, was that we know there are going to be people that are going to be limited by schedule, and we want them to stay engaged the best that they can with their classmates and their teacher and not miss out on key things for their learning. So expect that. There's a thing about lunch. Yeah, okay. Yeah, there was a question in here about wanting a unified perspective on breaks because they don't want to serve lunch at different times for different kids. Yeah, that's the reason why we have TK through 5 all has the same breaks, all has the same lunch. Middle schoolers all have the same break and all have the same lunch. It wasn't really possible for us to, without breaking up middle school blocks, because middle school blocks were a little bit longer. Middle school blocks go for about an hour. So to avoid breaking that up, we have middle school all on one schedule, which trails elementary a little bit, and then we have all of our elementary kids. Because we understand that it's not, when you're gonna take lunch with your kids, that you're gonna take lunch with all your kids. So we wanna do that. It says for working parents, 9 o'clock start time is preferred. 8:30 might work for stay-at-home parents. Yeah, so that 8:30 to 9 is not gonna be, typically be core instructional time. But like I said, if you have some challenges as far as those start times or some sequencing, talk to your teacher about it. Because we do, like I said, we have talked about the fact that we are going to need to be flexible this year. Can the voices of kids be recorded so it's just the discussion if they miss class? Yeah, we're not permitted to record kids and then save that. So there's some privacy stuff that we're struggling with. So yeah, the recording of kids is not permitted, at least the guidance that we've received so far. Will middle school students have handwritten assignments and not all writing assignments on the computer? Middle school leans very heavily towards computerized assignments. They do a lot through Google Classroom. If there is a desire for handwritten assignments, what we're doing in the elementary school is students that are doing handwritten assignments and they have to get turned in, they're taking photos of it and then sharing that through Seesaw or Google Classroom. And I would imagine that that would be a suitable option for middle school as well. So yeah, we've gotten with our technology, as kids get older, we've gotten a little bit away from the handwritten assignments. But mention that to your teacher because really they're looking for the teacher to be, the assignments to be turned in and to determine proficiency. What are you offering for students with special needs? That's a really good question. And that is the biggest issue we have right now with on-campus learning, is that we have for our special needs students, those that have qualified for an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. It basically says that those students have a disability to the extent that it's impacting their ability to access school. And so we create special plans for those students. And oftentimes those plans include time that they're pulled out to get individual attention or instruction, possibly modifications to their curriculum, longer time or additional supports, therapies like speech therapy and occupational therapy. So currently we have all those students who are currently on those plans. Those plans were modified in the spring to address distance learning. And then over the summertime, there was a brief window by which schools could have small groups of kids on campus. And for about 2 weeks, we had our kids with disabilities on campus for their ESY, their extended school year. Unfortunately, when the governor shut everything down, they shut that program down too. And so in the meantime, we'll continue to serve our kids with special needs through additional supports virtually. The flexibility of the afternoon creates some really interesting opportunities. And what I mean by that is when we have students that have disabilities, some will be better off in the main class and can stay there, and some will be better off pulled and getting additional supports. The fact that we have a more flexible afternoon and core in the morning allows for both those options, and not universally a kid is going to miss something. And so there's a lot more flexibility in how that's served. So that's sort of the general answer. As far as the specific disabilities, we kind of have to address that specifically. But the last point on that I'd like to make is we are hiring 2 new people into our special education department. We're interviewing next week for a special education coordinator, school psychologist, counselor position. So we're really excited to bring somebody in because that position now is going to enable us to provide more counseling service to students. Previously, our school psychologist was part-time and our coordinator was also a teacher. And so there was some flexibility, there was a limited flexibility on the depth of our counseling services. So we're excited about that. And then we are bringing in a preschool through 5th grade special education teacher that will oversee the students in those grades that are on IEPs. So if you have questions about a particular student with a disability in the meantime, please let me know, but I expect to find a couple winners next week and we'll get them connected to you. Can children still be IEP tested? Yes, they can to a certain extent. And let me kind of explain that. Most of the IEP testing can be done virtually. The challenge to a full test is that some of the protocols for that test are done in person, and those protocols aren't valid if you are trying to conduct them virtually. And so and this isn't the waiver to open up schools, but this is another path that we're trying to go down, is speaking with the health officials to say that testing kids for disability and providing them therapy and services is not instructional, it's actually an essential service. And I'm fairly confident that we're going to be able to work through that as an essential service and get the kids' needs met who have the greatest needs. I'm also fairly confident that once we start doing that responsibly, we'll get more opportunities to bring more kids back. But I think we're gonna start there. So IEP testing right now, I anticipate it happening soon, but we are limited on completing it. But if you do want your kid tested, let us know, because we can start that process with the things that we can do now. We're on summer break. Teachers are on summer break for a couple more weeks, but when they come back, we can start that up. Can we have a school supply donation to support the families that need a little help during this time? Yes, I'll ask Pamela if she can put in Mrs. Brown's email in the chat. Mrs. Brown would take donations for school supply list. That would be a great thing. Typically when we have a back to school, we do have parents that generously donate more supplies. And since we're not really collecting any of those, donations for kids in need would be wonderful. What is the schedule for TK? Everyday learning or only a few days? Yeah, let me pull that out, because TK is slightly different than our kindergarten schedule. For those of you unfamiliar with TK, TK is a program by which students that were not of kindergarten age, turned 5 between September 2nd and December 2nd, enroll in transitional kindergarten and essentially do a 2-year kindergarten program. And so our TK program right now, the current schedule, they start up at 8:30. They have whole group Zooms, virtual morning meetings. They do some fine motor, ELA, and math. And that's 8:30 to 10:10. They take the same break as everyone else at 10:10. 10:25 to 12:05, there's independent choice time. So there's some must-do, may-dos that keeps them from being on Zoom all day long. And then they have their lunch at 12, and then it's independent work after that. So it's appointments with teachers, parents, students, a lot of one-on-ones, those type of things. So your TK, you're still going your 5 days a week, but the instruction that they're getting typically goes till about 12 o'clock with optional stuff after that. We have Miss Winters is back and is going to be leading that. So if you have a TK student, you have an amazing teacher in Miss Winters. Moving on, can you clarify the plan for younger grades such as kinder? Their learning is usually very hands-on and interactive. Will there be a variety of supplied crafts, workbooks, and other physical projects? We haven't gotten too far in the craft piece yet. What we did get into kindergarten was that kindergarten can't be in a Zoom for a prolonged period of time and expect to hold their attention. Adults have that challenge, so our 5 and 6 year olds particularly. So I know that there was a lot of talk about movement, a lot of talk about breaks, and a lot of talk about small groups. I will bring, actually, if Pamela can send that question over to our kinder team. We did talk about sending home, just so you're aware, we did talk about sending home supplies that students would need for science projects and those types of things. So we've gotten there. We haven't gotten to the part about crafts and so forth. Workbooks and paper things, yes. Can teachers send out kids email lists of kids in each class so parents and kids talk, share, so forth, keep community spirit alive? That can be done with parent permission. So how we've handled that in the past is the teachers have sent a thing out to parents, say, is it okay if we share your email address with other parents in the class? With very few exceptions, parents are good with that. And once we get permission from you, so that is a thing, talk to your, if you want to initiate that in your class, which I think is a wonderful idea, talk to your child's teacher. If you wanted to be the virtual room mom and control some of that, that would be wonderful. But we just need something from parents. Most of our elementary teachers have a form for that. Something from parents that say it's okay for us to give this particular information about you. And then once that happens, you guys can communicate. Is there another option if you can't attend the orientation on Tuesday? Yes, so that's referring to the kinder orientation. So on Tuesday, we have a TK kinder orientation, and that is really going to go through some of these questions about how do you teach TK and kinder in a virtual environment? And I can tell you it's not easy. So we'll go over kind of some of those ideas. There's a reason we don't typically do it. But to answer that question, we will record the session. So similar to this session, we'll record it and we'll put it on our YouTube channel. And what I would suggest is take a look at that. And if you still have questions, either reach out to me or the kindergarten teachers directly, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you would have there. I noticed today that New York schools will open. What is California's current status? Unfortunately, we are on a county by county shutdown. So the governor has determined that counties with a certain infection rate are on the watch list and cannot shut down and cannot open up. The way the process works is you're on a watch list. If you have a reduction in cases for 2 consecutive weeks, then you have to wait 2 more weeks to stay off the watch list before you're allowed to open up schools. So we are really 28 days away from opening up. The challenge now that tied to the waiver is also the challenge that ties to the watch list, which means that the state is not confident that the numbers that they are receiving are accurate. So there is a hold on taking people off the watch list. So if you look at it from that, you're looking at a minimum of a month before we can, unless we get a waiver or there's some change in the rules. I'm optimistic that if New York schools open and they do it correctly, they can set some trends and maybe change some views. But our goal is that we're going to rely very heavily on the local health officials. And as much as we want to get school open, we want to make sure that we do it in a safe way. But our emphasis is that we want kids in school because we feel that they're at a detriment by not being in school. I did not mention this earlier, but a lot of people have very different opinions on it. And if we get to a point that we can start bringing kids back, we're not going to mandate that kids come back. So if you have a child and we are permitted to fully open up and bring everybody back, and you want to continue that distance learning, either for health reasons or you feel it's a better environment for your kids, let us know. That will be an option through the end of this year. So we're not going to force anybody to come back. There's a question that says, what's the schedule for kindergarten through 5th grade? So it varies a little bit from grade to grade, but the general schedule has kids from 8:30 to about 8:50. They're in most classes, they're doing some community building, morning meetings. You have students that take a break at 10:10. Depending on the grade level, we have some of them that are doing a more whole group in the morning. We have some of them that are flip-flopping, a virtual for the first 100 minutes and then a teacher-led instruction for the next 100 minutes. So what you're seeing that I can kind of generalize in those grades is a morning meeting at 8:30. What you're seeing is direct instruction in the morning on your reading, your writing, and your math. Small groups at the smaller grades. You also, oh, actually the writing is right after lunch. So you have a teacher workshop after lunch, again, groups in and out. And so the focus of the TK through 5 is teacher-led instruction in your language arts, your math, and your writing. And then the afternoon has more project-based type things. It has office hours, individual, kind of small groups. So if you're looking to kind of plan a schedule, plan on starting around 8:30, break at 10:10, and a lunch at noon. When will we receive the schedule for the live portions? Will it be different teacher to teacher? That's one of the things we were talking about last week. And one of our goals is, at least for kids of the same age, cluster those in a way so that schedules are consistent. Because we know, as if you are the teacher at home of multiple age kids, the closer those schedules align, the more readily, the more successful you'll be in supporting that. And so you'll see those schedules once school starts up. Typically what you'll see is you'll find out your teacher on Monday. The teacher will, the plan for that is announcements in the morning of who your teacher is, and then a connection with your teacher in the afternoon. So we'll be setting up a Zoom schedule on that Saints Day for you to actually meet your teacher in the afternoon virtually before you meet them physically on Wednesday. And I would imagine that on that first day of school, when the teacher starts laying things out, you'll kind of see exactly how those schedules work. But I do expect consistency. We're seeing a consistent schedule most likely in our K1, 2-5, and 6-8. So, but you'll get those on that first day of school. And then we had a question that says, can the schedule be posted on the website? Would be helpful to reference and work with your school schedule? Yep, we'll get the schedules up. We'll get, when those are complete, we'll get those schedules for you. They'll also be found in your teacher's classroom hubs, either the Google Classroom or the Seesaw. Will all virtual learning teaching hours, small group learning be done during the usual school hours? Yeah, and they will. We do have our schedules right now with the learning starting at 8:30 and for most grades ending at 3 p.m. Like I said, the after the lunch one is a lot more flexibility in small group, but you will see traditional school hours with the exception of that flip-flop on Friday. You'll see there'll be activities for kids on Friday afternoon, but there won't be any teacher instruction, or at least very minimal. Are kids considered absent if they're not on every Zoom call? That's a good question. We've been told that we have to account for students' involvement, and we have to report that up to the state and kind of follow all their rules, but they have not described kind of what they're looking for. What I would say is that the expectation is that kids are involved, but they're gonna be involved in multiple ways. There are some kids, as kind of the question came out earlier, are in camps, and maybe those camps don't allow access for them to be virtually. We want to make sure that they get the instruction, and we want to make sure that they get the learning, and their learning may look a little bit different than others. So I think what we're going to say on that one is we expect kids to participate, and if they can't, let us know so that we can arrange an instructional program that works. We're really designed on the experience and the outcomes, and in this case, there's a lot more flexibility into it than there would be in a traditional class. So the other piece about absences is we're going to be tracking kids that are not involved. And what we define that be is if a kid misses 60% of instruction in 1 week, we have a procedure by which we follow up with the kid and the family and find out what's going on. So keep that communication open so that we can provide some alternate resources and programming for you. Did you say that therapy services for special needs is considered an essential service? Are you expecting those kids will be on campus? What we are saying is I'm saying it's an essential service so that I can get that those services provided at school. The health department has not completely agreed with us yet. And so where we're at with that is I do believe that we will get permission to do that. We haven't yet. And it seemed like we were close. When we met with the health department, I meet with them weekly. There's an educational sector meeting and we can talk directly to the leads in education. And that was the issue that was brought up on Tuesday. I expect to get an answer on that this coming Tuesday. And if we can bring in students to get therapy services as an essential service, those would be some of the first kids that would be coming back onto campus. How do we get access to those virtual apps you mentioned? Yeah, we'll be spending next week loading kids into those classes. And when you get connected to the Learning Hub, whether it be Zoom or Google Classroom, you will get instructions on how to access those as well. Many of those will also be found in Clever, but don't expect them to be there until we announce classes on Saints Day. But they're really cool. I think you guys will enjoy those. Can you please address learning pods in conjunction with their teachers? So what I'm assuming that means is if students are meeting outside of school to learn, does that affect their class placements? Typically, no. When we kind of look at that, what we're seeing is that if those students are in a learning pod, they're in a learning pod, I'm assuming, if you're talking class placements, in the same grade level, and we expect a lot of consistency within that grade level. So we have not been, I know Mrs. Lee has been taking some requests for class placements because there's some unique situations that have arisen. So if you do have that as a situation, feel free to reach out to Mrs. Lee. But typically we have not been soliciting information about learning pods because, you know, without rain on anybody's parade, they're technically illegal. So we're not supposed to be doing them because kids aren't supposed to be mixing with other kids. But if that is happening, and I know it is, and you want that considered in class placements, I know that we are approaching being finalized with those. So if you have that, make sure you reach out to Mrs. Lee as soon as possible. I don't know if she'll be able to accommodate those requests, but we have not been looking at that as a consideration. Last year we were getting schedules for middle school on Mondays. Is there a way to get them earlier? Yeah, one of our plans for this year is to, by moving our minimum days to Fridays, is to having the preparation for the next week be prepared and pushed out on that Friday. Because we know that some parents use that weekend time to kind of help get their kids connected, or if the kids have some schedule issues, they can use that weekend time to get ahead. So that is our plan right now. So expect to see those things earlier. Don't expect to see everything posted on Friday for the next week. Because as I mentioned, we have some kids that like to work ahead, and their parents get really mad when they've finished all their work by Tuesday, and there's 3 more days left in the week. So the synchronous, asynchronous stuff will continue that learning, but we don't want them to do everything out of the gate. I think I've gotten down to the questions that came out. I know there was a lot of information that was shared. Like I said, we'll get back to school when it's safe to do so. We do have a good indication as to what our schedules are looking like, and we are trying to maintain not only the rigor, but the flexibility and consistency so that you have a regular day. And then when it comes to back to school, keep in mind that Monday the 17th is our Saints Day. Class lists go out 8 o'clock in the morning. Computer checkout at 10. Mrs. Lee will send some information out if you need an iPad or a Chromebook. And then in the afternoon, expect a Zoom from your teacher so you can meet your teacher that day. And then on the first day of school, we are going to be doing drive-throughs between 8:30 and noon so that you can actually physically come meet your teacher and get stuff. We will have opportunities if that time doesn't work for you to come pick up your stuff. We just probably won't have your teacher standing out there. So those are kind of the things that we're rolling out with. Any other questions that you may have? I don't see any of them here. I will pull up the chat and see if anything has popped in. But feel free to unmute yourself. I did have one thing I was going to ask you guys. Yeah, so let's see. I don't see any other questions here in the chat. I did have a poll question for you, and I was going to just finish up with that. And really what the poll question is, it's very similar for those of you who joined us last time. It's really just getting a gauge on where you guys are at on school return. One of the hardest things that we've had is that day to day, week to week, the rules change. And if we get to a point where we are permitted to bring kids back to school, we want to know how to start staffing and how many people would come back. How many people would come back if we were distance? How many people would stay virtual? Especially when we start looking at this waiver question. And so the poll that I'm going to pull up right now, and I encourage you to participate, it's a single question poll. And what it's going to say is if San Pasquale Union received a waiver to open school, would you send your TK through 5th grade student to school for on-campus learning? If we got a waiver, that would be one of the options that we would have. And the responses are, yeah, I'd do it. Or yes, only if you could do 6-foot distancing, which probably means we'd be in a blended schedule, kids at school a couple days a week. The third option is no, I would keep them home for distance learning. So I'd keep them home. And then the fourth option was, this doesn't apply to me because I don't have a kid in TK through 5th grade. So right now the waiver is really geared towards elementary. And even though they included 6th in that, it would not surprise me if the 6th grade had to be the oldest grade at the school. You know, they've done some weird things like that when they kind of go through. And so I'll give you guys a moment to put your poll answer in, and I will give you those results. In the meantime, if anyone has an additional question, you're free to either unmute or type that in the chat. We'd be happy to answer that for you. All right, so still a few more. We'll let our poll go for 30 more seconds. So if you're interested in doing it. All right, looks like we've slowed a little bit on our votes. So I'll tell you what we have now. And like I said, well, I can leave it open for a little bit longer to get our final. I'm not too sure if you guys can see the results of the poll. I don't think so. So let me kind of tell you where they're sitting. About 75% of you have responded to the poll. Of the folks that have responded, 20% have middle schoolers. So they're kind of out of this one. Out of the ones that did respond, we had 31 individuals, which is 35%, not counting that 20 that was pulled out, that say, yeah, I bring my kid back to school. 22%, 20 of you are saying, hey, I do it in a blended model. And that same number, 22%, 20 said, no, I'd still keep them home. And so what I'm hopeful is as we sort of move forward, we do have some folks that have a push to on-campus learning and feel fairly confident that we can put a program together that kind of gets our kids back safe and gets them learning again. And as the health conditions improve, that will be one of the factors that will allow us to get a waiver or allow us to open up schools. So hopefully we'll get some more people that we can get back on campus and return to what we do best. But in the meantime, we do have a good program for you. And I know that some of you were pleased with what happened last year, and some of you, especially in the middle, were not super crazy about that Acellus program. So we've listened to you. So we've got a program that I think will be a little bit more robust. And if you have a kid that's in middle school, especially those preparing for high school, we'll have some good things for them. So I do not see any, actually, I think there might be one more question coming in. We'll do one final question. I'm going to write down our poll results. And the final question was, can you address waiver and middle school? So that question is, there is no waiver process available for 7th and 8th graders. So that waiver process, which as I said, is kind of stuck in the mud right now because we do not have the ability to apply and they are not taking those waivers. But once they open up in its current form, the waivers are open to kindergarten through 6th grade. They haven't defined whether they have to be in the same school kind of a thing. We'd be looking for the options of doing a waiver for either our special eds and ELs in certain populations, depending on how they define it, up to our 5th grade classes. But there's currently no waiver option for our 7th and 8th. So those classes would stay in virtual learning until the school's removed from the watch list and allowed to have kids on campus. When do we select the type of education we want? Yeah, so we haven't put out any polls. I haven't put out any solicitation for our learning models. Our intention is to put our students into our virtual learning model, which is the one that has teacher involvement, has synchronous and asynchronous options, has the ability for small and individual instruction from their classroom teachers. We would encourage all students to start with that option. And if it doesn't fit, then move from that option into maybe a hybrid of that option where you're still connected to your teacher and then be in the distance model, which is more computer-led, or the homeschool model, which is more parent-led. We feel it'll be a much better outcome for your child if it can fit into where you're at with your schedule and your priorities. So if you do have a strong feeling about the virtual model or the homeschool model, let us know. But we would encourage you to start out in that model that you're most closely connected to your child's teacher and most closely connected to their peers. One of the reasons that we're really eager to get kids back is kids are very socially isolated. And the students that are choosing the virtual models, that it's essentially the computer teaching them, or they're choosing the distance learning model, the computer teaching them, or they're choosing the homeschool model with the parents teaching them, the missing component is their interaction with other kids. And so we really want to focus on that. So we would encourage you to look at our virtual model, which is the one that's teacher-led, the one that has daily meetings with their peers, direct instruction from their teacher. But if you feel strongly about the others, we can talk to you about how we would provide those. But like I said, we're steering our families very heavily into the virtual model that has some additional supports. Do kinders have the option for a distance model? They do, but it would be difficult. Having a kindergartner learn strictly from a computer or primarily from a computer is really difficult. And so again, what I would encourage is to start in that virtual model. And if there's time issues, let's work together on the time issues to provide some either asynchronous instruction that at least the teacher is connecting with them in some way, at least they're connecting with their peers in some way. So I would discourage a completely distance model for our kindergartners, but we do have the technology to offer that. So if that's a path we could. More homeschool model without working on scheduled Zoom model, or is that just for older kids? Yeah, we could do a homeschool model where the parent literally got the curriculum and they became the teacher. And the school essentially sets the pace of what gets accomplished when and provides some assessment on progress. But that is very much the parent being the sole teacher. Again, I would encourage to put your toe in the virtual model first, because there might be a place where there's certain aspects of that your child really benefits from. And there is certain aspects where they're a little bit more directed. Like I said, flexibility will be the word of the day, and the needs of each kid will also be pretty paramount as far as how we move forward. And similar to the spring, when we were kind of figuring a lot of this out, we will need to be flexible. The difference between the spring is we're a lot more purposeful, and I think we have a lot more resources to provide. So I wouldn't let some of those experiences deter you from trying this and seeing how it is. I think you'll find that there'll be aspects of it, even if there's schedule challenges, that will work. All right, I think that is all of our questions. Final poll for those of you guys who are interested. We ended up having most of our folks, 32 people or 34% of the poll would be ready to send kids back to school. 20 people or 22% of the poll was looking at a blended model. So one that maintained a physical distancing. We have 25%, which is 23 of you, were would still opt for a distance learning model, even if the doors could open. And then 18 of you, which is 19%, were middle school parents who would not be eligible for that waiver was offered. So I really want to thank you guys for your time. I think one of the things that has helped us in making really good decisions here is getting a lot of input. We spent a lot of time getting input from our staff. We spent a lot of time getting input from you. And that has led us to a point where we've got a program that we'll be proud of. And so we're eager and excited to welcome your kids back to school in whatever form we can, to engage you as our partners the best that we can. So continue to send your suggestions, continue to send your questions. And as we roll this out, we did not take a cookie cutter plan and just overlay it. One of the benefits we have at San Pasqual Union School is we're one school and we can do what's right by our kids and by our families. So as we move forward in this, continue to keep us informed as to what works for your kid and what doesn't, and we'll continue to keep adjusting. So thank you very much for your time. We will be hosting another one of these. I've got to check my calendar. It's starting to get a little bit busier. So I will check my calendar, but we will be hosting in the next week or two. But in the meantime, prior to our next session, don't hesitate to reach out and we will answer your questions and get you what you need. Again, I thank you very much. I am going to close out. We will, I think I can share that maybe. Oh yeah, no, actually I didn't say you learn something new every day. So you can see the poll results for yourself. So thank you very much. It was good to see all of you. And I will look forward to seeing you hopefully at our big giant drive-through, if not sooner. All right, until then, be safe.